I'm Brittany, this is Wei Ying, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we continue reading Volume 3 of Erha. Chuaning's dead. Okay? Chuaning's dead. He got Moran to safety in the most brutal way possible, and then he died. Like he's dead. He's dead. So that's the vibe we're starting with today. That was apparently, in terms of the greater arc of things, that was the end of Volume 1. Chuaning's dead. Okay. Yeah. And also, we've gone from every chapter starting with this venerable one to every chapter starting with Shizun. She just does this for the foreseeable future. Because she thought that was okay. And I'm still angry about it. But it's fun. Hello. We usually read for about a couple of hours. We take a break somewhere around the middle to stand up, walk around, get tea, and all that jazz. And please, for the love of God, I'm doing the ADD thing where I don't remember a really important thing until it comes up, like right now. So now 2 weeks in a row, I get to tell you that I still have not put the spoiler-free content warnings link thing in the description of this video. I wrote it down last time, too. So we're going to try that again. Warning. Jesus Christ. I swear. There are many content warnings for this series. If you have ever, at any point in time, even touched a content warning in your life when it comes to darker stories, you should probably touch them for this one. And we're not even done yet. We're not even halfway through the series yet. And I'm telling you, you should be... If that is something that you know you have needed in the past, you should be looking it up now. This is your nice, big, loud, go read a content warning notice. We are on page 119 for chapter 98. We should be going through to chapter 102 today, and that'll be about where we stop, because we usually cover about 40-50 pages, and if we get to the end of 102, that'll be like 51 or something like that. I have never read this book before. I have never seen anything about it. This is all brand new to me. So please no spoilers for my sake in the chat, but then also please no spoilers in the chat for the people who have also never read this before, because we always have a few people like that. Alrighty. This chapter is called Shizun, I'm begging you, please pay attention to me. Oh, that makes this the start of Volume 2, arc-wise, because it was broken up differently in this. So we are now beginning a new arc. Sorry, that's important for me, the structure nerd that I am, to get my head around. Shizun Peak had a cliff with a funny name called Ah. There were numerous stories within the sect as to how this name came to be. The most common was that people often fell from it due to how sheer it was, crying out, Ah! But Mourning knew that wasn't the reason. The cliff rose high into the clouds, steep and nigh impossible to scale. It was terribly cold, and its top was covered in snow year-round. This was where the dead of Shizun Peak lay, while they awaited their funerals. Mourning had only ever come here once in his past life. That would be for Shimei. And now we're here for Chuanning. Then, as now, it had been after the bloody battle that followed the opening of the rift to the infinite hells, which had ended countless lives, Shimei's among them. He had refused to accept reality, and had knelt by Shimei's coffin for days on end, gazing at his face within, which looked almost as if he were merely sleeping. It's called Ah, from back when your dad passed, was what Shui Jungyang had revealed to him in the past life as he accompanied his nephew in the chill air of the Frost Sky Hall. I only had one brother. We founded Xisheng Peak together, but your dad, he was stubborn, just like you. He barely even got to enjoy the good life, or maybe he got sick of it, but one slip against the demons, and he was gone. It was freezing inside Frost Sky Hall. Shui Jingyan took a swig from the sheepskin of wine he'd brought, then offered it to Mo Run. Here, have some. Just don't tell your aunt. Mo Run didn't take it, didn't move. Shui Jingyan asked, I was so miserable in those days. It felt like my heart had been dug out. All I did was sit up here with your dad and cry. I sound pretty awful when I cry. I was just howling, like, and that's where the name came from. It's named after the howl of grief that you let out when somebody you love dies. No, that's good. That's nice. He glanced at Mo Run and clapped him on the shoulder. Your uncle isn't well read or anything, but I know this much. Life is ephemeral, like the morning dew, over in a blink. Mingjing's just gone on a bit ahead of you. You can be brothers again in the next life. Brothers comes with a footnote. 7. Brothers here refers to being close friends. Brothers here refers more to being close friends than any blood relation. Mo Run slowly closed his eyes. Condolences and whatnot are just words, Shui Jingyan continued. If you're sad, go ahead and cry. If you don't want to leave, stay and keep him company. But you have to eat, and you have to drink your water. Go grab a bite at Mungpo Hall. After that, you can come back here and kneel as long as you want. I won't stop you. I mean, a man who understands the grieving process. Hello? For something that has just happened, in this case in a flashback with Shimei, for something that has just happened, this is pretty bang on. Like, you have to eat, you have to drink water, but right now, you get to do whatever the fuck you want. If that means coming up here and just sitting for however long you want, that's fine. Because grief is weird. We love a man who respects the weirdness of grief and who caters to grief rather than the, get over it, stand up, dust off, move on with your life. Don't come back here. Don't wallow. And the immediate aftermath of grief? Please. Frost Sky Hall was frigid and silent. White silk drifted lightly within the grand hall, like gentle fingers brushing the brow. Mo Run gradually opened his eyes. The coffin was the same as the one in his memory, cast from the black snow of Kunlun, lustrous and translucent, with threads of frozen mist streaming from the surface. Only this time, the body lying inside was Chu Waning's. Mo Run had never imagined that the one to die in the heavenly rift in this lifetime would be Chu Waning. He was wholly taken by surprise. He didn't know how to react. Faced with this person's ice-cold body, he found that he didn't feel much of anything. Not joy at the death of his foe, nor grief at the passing of his Shizun. Mo Run stared at Chu Wanning through lowered lashes for a long while, almost disbelieving. His face appeared even colder than usual, now covered in a layer of frost and truth. Flecks of ice clung to his closed lashes. His lips were a pale blue, and his skin was nearly transparent, the faint blue of veins visible like minute cracks in porcelain. How could he have been the one to die? Mo Run raised his hand to touch Chu Waning's cheek. It was cold. His hand traced down to his throat, his neck. There was no pulse. And then to his hand. He gripped it. The joints were already beginning to stiffen, and the skin there felt rough. Mo Run thought it strange. The tips of Chu Waning's fingers were lightly calloused, but his palms had ever been soft and delicate. Despite himself, he looked closer. Scores of lacerations covered his hands, open cuts that, although cleaned, would never heal. He remembered Shui Meng's words. His spiritual energy was completely drained. He was no different from an ordinary person at that time. He couldn't use a single technique, not even a simple communication spell. He could only carry you on his back and climb up the stairs of Shizun Peak, step by step. And when he couldn't do that anymore, when he couldn't even stand, he had crawled on the ground, on his knees, dragging him until his fingers were torn and his hands were covered in blood. All to bring him home. Was it you who carried me back? Mourning muttered hollowly. His question was met with only silence. Chuaning, was it you? Silence. No reply. I won't believe it unless you nod, Mourning said to the man in the coffin. No, sorry, the chapter title just sunk in. I can't even drink tea. I'm starting to dislike this woman. I can't even tell where the hell I was. I'm so angry. Reliving a sentence, his expression was placid, as if fully expecting the person before him to wake up. Chuaning, just give me a nod. Just one nod and I'll believe you. And I won't hate you anymore. Just one nod, okay? But Chuaning only lay there, cold and expressionless, as if it made no difference to him whether Mourning hated him or not. He himself had left with a clear conscience, abandoning the living to their guilt. As if it made no difference to him whether Mourning hated him or not. It's like, that just gives me the impression that Mourning's perceived, I can't even finish that sentence. Mourning's perception of Chuaning's opinion of Mourning, you know what I mean? Mourning thought, all while Chuaning was alive, that Chuaning was almost aggressively indifferent, did not give a shit, which is why he didn't lift a finger to, save Shimei, or especially didn't, give a shit at all about Mourning himself. And it's almost like he didn't actually... It's like now he's seeing the real indifference that he's been projecting all this time, because Chuaning's dead. And is now showing him the utter indifference that Mourning thought he had been seeing this entire time. I feel like I eventually made that made sense. Living or dead, this person had always been more maddening than he was pitiable. Mourning sneered. Then again, he said, when have you ever listened to me? As he stared at Chuaning, he suddenly felt that the whole thing was so absurd. All these years, he'd hated Chuaning for looking down on him. The hatred had deepened when he failed to save Shimei. For over a decade, this hatred had festered, twisting and turning in his heart. Then one day, out of nowhere, he was told, when Chuaning turned and left back then, it was to protect you. He was suddenly told that the discernment barrier is twinned. Whatever damage you took, he suffered the same. His spiritual energy was spent. He couldn't even protect himself anymore. Great. Awesome. Perfect. Chuaning was right in everything he did. Then what about Mourning? Head in the dark like a know-nothing idiot, running in circles like a goddamn clown, hissing and snarling in his hatred for so long. And for what? A brief misunderstanding was like a smudge of dirt on a healing wound. As long as it was discovered in time, washed off, and the salve reapplied, everything would be fine. But if the misunderstanding was allowed to persist for 10, 20 years, if the person trapped in that web poured in endless hatred, worries, repression, and even his life, these emotions would scab over and grow into new skin, would become part of one's body. And then, to suddenly be told That's not how it is. You've got it all wrong. What then? The dirt had lodged under the skin with the passing of time, already been subsumed into the blood. To remove that bygone hatred, the healed flesh would have to be ripped open again. A misunderstanding of 1 year is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding of 10 years is an injustice. A misunderstanding of a lifetime, from life unto death, is fate. Their fate was blighted. That's a scene break. We're on page 123. I'm really disliking her more and more. The heavy gates of the Frost Sky Hall swung slowly open, just as in the previous lifetime. I mean, what the fuck kind of metaphor was that? What was that? What kind of well thought out, dramatically effective, perfectly evocative metaphor about misunderstandings festering and becoming part of you was that? Who does she think she is? Just as in the previous lifetime, Shui Jingyong, a sheepskin of wine in his hand, trod heavily to Mourung's side and sat on the floor beside him. I heard you were here. Uncle will keep you company. Shui Jingyong's fierce eyes were red. He had plainly been crying not long ago. And him too. Mourung said nothing. Shui Jingyong twisted open the cap of the sheepskin and drank deeply before falling still. He wiped roughly at his face and, with great effort, summoned a grin. Yu Hung never liked it when I drank, but now... He sighed. No, never mind. I'm not even that old, but I've already seen off so many friends. Runner, do you know how that feels? Mourung lowered his lashes, silent. Shui Jingyong had asked him the same question in his past life. Back then, he'd only had eyes for Shimei's lifeless body. What did he care if others lived or died? He didn't understand, and he didn't want to. It's not like he was dumb. But how could he not understand now? Before he had been reborn, he had stood alone in the empty halls of Wushan Palace. One day he had dreamt of long-gone days as Yu Hung's disciple and had jolted awake from his light slumber, gripped by a sudden impulse to visit his old room in the disciple quarters. When he opened the door and stepped inside, that narrow room, unused for so long, was covered in a layer of dust. He had found a small fragrance burner toppled onto the floor, knocked over by someone many years ago. He picked it up and moved out of habit to put it back in its customary place. But the years had flowed by like a swift stream. Holding the burner, he suddenly froze. Where did I used to keep this burner? He couldn't remember. His eagle-like gaze swept across the attendants behind him. But their faces were blurs. He couldn't tell one from another. But of course these people wouldn't know where in his old room the youthful emperor used to keep this fragrance burner. Where did I keep this burner? He couldn't remember, and anyone who could was dead or gone. How could Mourung not understand how Shui Jingyong felt right now? Every now and then, out of the blue, I'll recall some joke from my youth and blurt it out. But then I realize not a single person who gets it is around anymore. Shui Jingyong took another gulp of wine and, lowering his head, let out a mirthless laugh. Like your dad, or our friends from before, or your Shizun. Runner, do you know why this cliff is called Ah? The tears in his eyes refracted fragments of light. Mourung knew what he wanted to say, but he was too distraught to hear about his dead father from Shui Jingyong just now. I know. It's because Uncle used to cry here. Ah. Shui Jingyong paused and blinked slowly, the wrinkles at the corner of his eyes deep. Did your aunt tell you? Shui Jingyong wiped away his tears and took a breath. All right, okay. Then you already know what Uncle wanted to say. Go ahead and let it out if you're sad. It's all right. There's no shame in crying for someone. This man just keeps giving me green lights. But Mo-run didn't cry. Maybe his heart had already hardened into iron after 2 lifetimes of this. Compared to his devastation at Shime's death back then, his current self was very calm. So calm that he was unsettled by his own numbness, surprised to find that he was really this heartless. Shui Jingyong finished drinking and stayed a while longer, then got to his feet rather unsteadily. Perhaps his legs had lost feeling from kneeling so long, or perhaps he had drunk too much. His broad hand clapped Mo-run on the shoulder. The heavenly rift's been closed, but we still don't know who's behind it all. Maybe that was the end of it, but there may be another big battle on the horizon. Ronair, make sure you go down and eat something. Don't wreck your body. With that, he turned and left. Still get you a man. But also, this reminded me of a thought that I had between the last stream and today. Was that, because I said in the previous stream that like this opening the Heavenly Rift feels like somebody's end game, but obviously it's not the end game, otherwise it'd be at the end. But why else would anybody want to do that? And going full paranoia for a second, it's a non-zero possibility that whoever the heck is doing all of this, Zhenlong chess formation, all of that, the fake Gochung, that thing, literally opened the rift to cause like this to happen, to affect Mo-run specifically. That this was just part of some plan to shape Mo-run's development or something. That there was some kind of more pointed, specific use for opening up the Heavenly Rift. That's my new guess, anyway. It was night, and outside Frost Sky Hall, a waning crescent hung in the skies above. As he trod through the snow that blanketed the cliff year-round, half a skin of wine in hand, Shui Jingyong's voice, deep and rough like a broken gong, rang out in a short tune from Sichuan. These would be the lyrics then. Greeting old friends, half but ghosts, meeting only in cups of wine. Beneath the osmanthus tree hides a pot of wine, a drink shared between time-worn faces and streaks of white. The first light of dawn shatters the dream. All depart, leaving me alone with my aged tears. I'd give what remains of my life to the god of dreams, if only to call you back, cup after cup. That comes with a footnote. The first line in the song Shui Jingyong sings is adapted from a line in Presented to the Recluse Way by Tang Dynasty poet Dufu. Things were different from the past life after all. The one who died wasn't Shime, but Chu Wanning, and so Shui Jingyong was stricken by an even deeper sorrow. With his back to the open gates of Frost Sky Hall, Mo-run listened to the lingering sound of that hoarse voice, resonant and mournful. Little by little, like an eagle soaring over the horizon, the voice grew distant, until it was swallowed by the wind and snow. The world was blanketed by a brilliant layer of white, and the moon high in the boundless sky washed over all till it was faint and insubstantial, leaving only one line that echoed over and over. Leaving me alone with my aged tears. Leaving me alone with my aged tears. Aged like 2 lifetimes aged, maybe? Not for Shui Jingyong, obviously. You know what I mean. That's a scene break. Another mean one. Mourning wasn't sure how much time had passed when he finally left Frost Sky Hall to begin his slow descent down the mountain. His uncle was right. The heavenly rift might be closed, but this affair was far from over. Chuaning was gone. If there were another battle, Mourning would have to fend for himself. It was already late by the time he reached Mungpo Hall, and there was no one around save the old woman who made the late-night supper. Mourning asked for a small bowl of noodles and found a corner spot in which to slowly eat. The noodles were hot and numbing, warm in his stomach. Mungpo Hall was dimly lit and hazy when he glanced up through the thick screen of steam between ravenous bites. He recalled how stubborn he'd been after Shimei's death in his past life, how he had refused to leave or eat for 3 whole days, and how, later, when he had finally been convinced to leave Frost Sky Hall to eat something, he had happened across Chuaning in the kitchen, his back to Mourning as he clumsily rolled wrappers and mixed filling. There had been flour and water on the table and a few rows of wontons arranged in a neat line. Clang. The crash of every bit of it being swept off that table rang out from the bygone past and stilled the chopsticks in the present Mourung's hand. Suddenly, it was hard for him to swallow. At the time, he had thought that Chuaning was taunting him, that he purposely wanted to hurt him. But thinking back on it now, it was possible that Chuaning really did only want to make him a bowl of wontons in place of the departed Shimei. Who the fuck do you think you are? Do you have any right to use the things he used? To make the food he made? Shimei is dead. Are you happy now? Or do you have to hound all your disciples to death or madness before you're satisfied? Chuaning, there's no one left in this world who could make those wontons ever again. No matter how much you imitate him, you'll never even come close. Each word, a stab to the heart. He went back to eating his noodles, unwilling to think any more on it. But it wasn't that easy. His memories gave him no peace. I imagine he's in for a very long time of recontextualizing every single interaction he's ever had with this man. He remembered Chuaning's face in that moment with awful clarity, clearer than ever before. His face had betrayed nothing, neither joy nor sorrow. He remembered every detail with an unprecedented sharpness. He remembered the faint tremble at the tips of those fingers, the smudge of flour on the plane of that cheek. He remembered the plump, snowy wonton scattered across the floor. He remembered how Chuaning had lowered his lashes and bent to carefully pick up those wontons, now unfit to eat, then thrown them away with his own hands. Thrown them away with his own hands. More than half of the noodles with peas were still left, but Mourning couldn't stomach another bite. He pushed the bowl away and fled before this place could drive him insane. He dashed madly through Xishang Peak, as if trying to outrun this decade-long misunderstanding, as if trying to recover those ridiculous years, as if trying to catch up to that person who had left Mungpo Hall that day, all alone. Catch up to him so he could say, "I'm sorry. I was wrong to hate you." Ooh! Ooh! You know what they call that? That's some growth. In the deep black of night, Mourning ran aimlessly. He ran and ran, but everywhere he went, he saw remnants of Chuaning's shadow. The platform of Sin and Virtue, where Chuaning had taught him to read and trained him in swordplay. Naiha Bridge, where he had shared an umbrella with him as they walked together. Clear Sky Hall, where he had endured punishment by striking and left without anyone by his side. He felt more and more distraught, more and more helpless. Suddenly he ran into an open clearing, and it felt like the haze had dissipated, and he could once again see the bright moon above. He came to a stop, taking shuddering breaths. The heaven-piercing tower. The place where he had died in his last life. The place where he had first met Chuaning. With mayhem in his eyes like a battlefield in chaos, with his heart beating wild like the pounding of war drums, powerless to ward off the tidal surge of the past and helpless to avoid its relentless assault, he had been forced here in the end. Here, where the moonlight was palest white and the breeze a gentle caress, where they had first met. Mourning finally stopped running. He knew he couldn't escape it. In this life he was bound to owe Chu Wanning. Slowly, Mourning strode up the steps toward the magnificent high tongue tree. He reached out and laid his palm on the bark of the trunk, dry and hard as a calloused heart. It had been nearly 3 days since Chu Wanning's death. Mourning looked up. The flowering tree looked as gentle as ever. Only then did an unfathomable sorrow well up in his chest. With his forehead pressed to the trunk of the tree, he finally cried, his tears falling like rain. "Shizun, Shizun," he murmured between choked sobs. Over and over he repeated those words he had spoken the first day he met Chu Wanning. "Won't you pay attention to me? Please pay attention to me." But although the scenery remained the same, the people were no more. Mourning stood before the heaven-piercing tower, alone. No one would pay attention to him anymore. No one would ever meet him here again. The reborn Mourning had the body of a youth, but within it was the soul of the 32-year-old Taishanjun. He had seen far too much of life and death, tasted all the joy and sorrow the world had to offer. Thus, in this reborn life, he had never displayed much genuine emotion. He had always remained muted, as if hidden behind a mask. Yet at present, the loss and anguish written on his face was so raw and vulnerable, so genuine and naive. Only now was he like an ordinary youth who had lost his Shizun, like a child who had been abandoned, like a stray dog that no longer had a home to return to. "Pay attention to me. Please pay attention to me." In the end, the only reply was the rustle of leaves and the dancing shadows of flowers. The person with such striking features, who had stood beneath the high-tongue tree that year, would never again, could never again, lift his head to look at him. Not even one last glance. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 131 for chapter 99, called Shizun's Third Weapon. And I hadn't thought until just now that I guess a truly wild move would be Mourning being reborn again. But in order for that to happen, he would have to, take his own life in the wake of Chu Wanning's death again. And that would be brutal. However, if we know anything about this series, that would be a really big move. But that could potentially be, because obviously I don't know how the rest of the series is supposed to play out. Potentially, it would fuck me up. It really would. Or if, Chu Wanning would be reborn somehow. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where she goes from here. I really genuinely don't. While there's a few immediate options, there's always the possibility of a secret third thing. Who can say? I don't know. I don't have a sense towards any one particular thing. We could raise him from the dead somehow. I don't know. We don't know. I'm in uncharted territory, and that doesn't happen very often, actually. As someone who's been a relentless nerd about stories since, kind of forever, since I hit puberty, I've been absorbing stories for a very long time, and I legitimately don't know. This is new to me. So chapter 99, on page 131, is called Shizun's Third Weapon. That night, Mourning slept propped against the high-tongue tree. There were many places in Xishang Peak that bore traces of Chu Wanning's presence. If he'd wanted to pay his respects, there was none more suitable than Red Lotus Pavilion. But only leaning against this tree dulled the ache in his heart. Only here could he feel a faint connection to the world of the living. He had once been certain that taking Chu Wanning as his master was the greatest misfortune of his life, that it had been a mistake from the start. Only now did he see that the unfortunate one wasn't him, wasn't Moe Yu, but the one who stood under the flowers that day, head bowed and lost in thought. The unfortunate one was Chu Wanning. Shenjun, pay attention to me. He seemed to vaguely recall those words as the first he had said to his Shizun. Maybe not those exact words. It had been too long ago, and he no longer remembered it clearly. But he could still remember vividly the look on Chu Wanning's face as his lashes flicked up, bewildered and startled. How gentle he had looked then. As he lay beneath the flowering tree, Moran thought that, if time could flow backward, back to the day he chose his master, he absolutely shouldn't pester Chu Wanning into accepting him as a disciple again. No matter what. Because the price exacted for that moment, for the flicker of those eyelashes, was the endless entanglement to follow, was Chu Wanning's very life. 2 lifetimes. His Shizun had come to ruin at his hands. 2 lifetimes. Moran's throat worked in a swallow, and he closed his eyes against the threat of a sob. He passed a long while in an agony that felt as if a million ants gnawed at his heart before finally drifting into a fitful slumber. In his dreamscape, a fragment of memory he dared not touch since his rebirth rested free of its chains, raised its knife, and carved out his heart. Absolutely not. The way that is worded, excuse me, between Meat Bun and the translation team, are you insane? In his dreamscape, a fragment of memory he dared not touch since his rebirth rested free of its chains, raised its knife, and carved out his heart. That is writing. That is words. Those are words. I can't be articulate right now. I'm writing down the page number for that. One moment, please. That's page 132. And that led into a scene break. I'm assuming we get to see this dream. It's a very happy stream today. Hi. I hope you're having a good time. At that time, at that time, he had stood at the pinnacle of the human realm, and Chu Wanning, his spiritual core abolished, had been a prisoner in his palace. He had been targeted in recent days by several successive assassination attempts, the last perpetuated by Shui Meng and Mei Han Shui. Although Mo Run was too powerful to yield his life to them, he had sustained grave injuries. He'd needed to convalesce for over a month within the confines of his palace before he recovered his strength. Sichuan was a damp place, even more so in those days, and the pitter-patter of rain could be heard day and night. Mo Run stood under the shelter of the colonnade, his fingers pale as jade where they clutched the hem of the heavy brocade cloak draped over his shoulders. He gazed at the gray skies overhead, his countenance caught between mirth and madness. Even in silence, the twisted nature that radiated from him was unmistakable. He had been born with such a handsome face, yet the light in his eyes was dark and ruthless, devoid of warmth. And the longer he sat on that throne, the darker it grew. Footfalls sounded behind him. "There you are," he said without looking back. "Are you going to lay waste to Kunlun Tashwe Palace?" Chu Wanning's voice echoed faintly in the grand hall. "And what if I am?" A pause. "Have you forgotten your promise to me? You swore you wouldn't seek Shui Meng's life." Mo Run's voice was uneven. "Shizun has come all this way and hasn't even stopped to ask after my injuries or whether I'm cold standing out in the wind. He only cares who I'm going to kill." "Moe Yu, I came to tell you to stop doing things you'll live to regret." Regret? Shouldn't you be the one who feels regret? You already shattered your core trying to stop me from raising Rufeng sect. Now I'm going to raise Tashui Palace, and you're just an ordinary person without the strength to oppose me. Don't you regret not minding your own business back then? Mourning turned to glance at him over his shoulder, a flicker in his eyes and a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Chuaning, you're a worthless cripple. How are you going to stop me? What do you have left? Chuaning could find no words for a long while. Maybe because he really did have nothing left. A deafening clap of thunder suddenly split the skies, and rain poured forth, streaming down the roof and spilling from the eaves. Finally, Chuaning closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he only said, quiet, "Don't go." Mourning turned on his heel with a swish of black robes. Against a backdrop of torrential rain and freezing wind and ash-gray skies, he looked at Chuaning within the hall. "And why shouldn't I go? I already gave Shui Meng his chance back then. You submitted to me for his sake, and I kept my word and spared his life in exchange for your body. But now he is the one after my life, so tell me, why shouldn't I go?" Chuaning looked at him in silence. "Well, you've nothing to say?" Mourning scoffed. "Go on. Berate me, curse me out, say something. Chuaning, what happened to all that might of yours? I know Shui Meng's your favorite, your prized disciple. He's earnest and sincere, and I'm no more than mud on the sole of his boot." "That's enough." Chuaning's brows were knitted tight on his pale face, as if trying to suppress some emotion. "It is not enough. How could it be?" The sight of Chuaning's distress filled Mourung's heart with a savage glee. Anger, ecstasy, hatred, and jealousy scorched his heart with their intensity, and his eyes glinted as he paced back and forth. "There's no second chance, Chuaning. There's no second chance for him. I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to skin him for a rug, drink wine from his skull. I'll scoop his insides out, chop him up, and stew him. You can't stop me. Chuaning, you can't stop me." The more he raved, the more enraptured he grew. His eyes reddened. He was frenzied, crazed. "Snap out of it." Suddenly, a hand was fisted in the collar of his robes, and another struck him hard across the face. Chuaning was so close that Mourung could see the quiver of his eyelashes and the shining tears in his eyes. "Mourung, wake up already. Wake up." "I am awake." The burn of that slap on his cheek drove him only further into insanity. He glared at Chuaning's face, and his anger flared. "I'm perfectly fucking awake. You're the one who's asleep. Are you blind?" Mourung shoved Chuaning away and tore open the collar of his robes to reveal the blood-stained bandages across his chest. "Are you blind, Chuaning?" he roared, jabbing at his own chest, and when even that wasn't enough, ripped the gauze away completely to expose the bloody mess beneath. "Who do you think did this? Your perfect little disciple, Shui Meng. If he had aimed his long chung just a hair to the side, I'd be dead. So you tell me why the fuck I should let him go. As far as you're concerned, his life is a life, but mine counts for nothing. Is that it?" In his fury, Mourung grabbed Chuaning's hand and pressed it to his bloody wound. "Didn't you want to stop me? Here's your chance. Go on then, dig out my heart. Chuaning, why don't you just dig out my fucking heart?" Chuaning was silent. The tips of his fingers trembled, cold as ice. Mourung glared at him, furiously, ruthlessly, the veins at his neck throbbing. "Go on," he rasped, his voice raw. "Dig it out." The torrent of rain against the roof was frenzied madness. Silence reigned. Neither moved. After an interval, Mourung finally released Chuaning's hand and, breathing low and harsh, declared in a deep voice, "Shui Ziming and Mei Hanshui's lives are mine." Chuaning said nothing. "Go ahead and hate me, Shizun," he said. "My life's already come to this anyway. Our lives have already come to this. No, none can turn back now, so we might as well press on in this darkness. I'm merely dragging some old friends along for company on my way to hell." That day, Chuaning had gazed at the back of Mourung's black robes as he stalked away. He finally spoke. "Mourung, if you destroy Tashui Palace and kill Shui Meng, I will end my life in front of you." "I have nothing left to barter with, but at the very least I can still choose death." When he heard those words, Mourung paused. He turned to look over his shoulder, and a smile spread across his handsome face as he stood against that dreary backdrop of wind and rain. So long as this venerable one draws breath, you'll not find death so easily. Chuan-Ning only looked at him. Lest you forget, even when all the blood had drained from your body, I still snatched you back from the gates of death. You'll be spending the rest of this life with me, no matter how much you disgust me. After venting his madness, Mourning gradually regained his usual placid demeanor, cold and threatening. My dear Shizun, just behave yourself and wait here at Xisheng Peak. When I capture Shuimeng, I'll haul him back here so he can take a good long look at the god he frets over night and day, writhing under me like a wanton little slut. In consideration of our shared past, it's only right that I grant him the courtesy of full comprehension before he dies, after all. But, counter to all of Mourung's expectations, Chuzongsha was still Chuzongsha. 1 month later, Mourung stood proudly before Heavenly Lake at the summit of Kunlun Mountain and did exactly as he said he would. He captured Meihon Shui and Shuimeng and bound them to pillars of ice, then used the Zhenlong chess formation to induce the thousands of souls at Tashui Palace to slaughter one another as the two looked on. The snowy mountain, once pristine and majestic, was dyed crimson in an instant. Blood streamed into Heavenly Lake and seeped into the ground. Mourung sat calmly before the palace gates, eating grapes fetched by the servants and smiling as he oversaw the scene of destruction. Meng, do you like it? He glanced at Shuimeng, whose eyes were glazed and unfocused. Shuimeng remained silent and unresponsive, as if struck deaf. Pleased, Mourung smiled still more affectionately and said, Your cousin staged this show for you. Are you enjoying it? A faint murmur. Spare Tashui Palace. Mourung blinked. What? Spare Tashui Palace. Shuimeng's usually bright gaze was empty. Let them go. Let Meihon Shui go. I was the one who tried to kill you. Kill me. Leave everyone else out of it. Mourung couldn't help but laugh. Are you trying to negotiate with me? No. Shuimeng's eyes were hollow. I'm begging you. The darling of the heavens had said, I'm begging you. Mourung's eyes gleamed, the demon in his heart reveling at these words. Faintly amused, he gripped Shuimeng by the jaw and forced him to look up at him. Yet before he could speak, a burst of radiant green lit up the skyline. What's going on? His retinue had no chance to respond. A resplendent spiritual array flowed out over the towering summit to cover all the thousands of miles of Kunlun Mountain. And there above the array stood Chuan-Ning, his robes white as snow fluttering lightly among the clouds. A peculiarly shaped guqin hung in the air before him. It was black from end to end, with a tail that curved upward and ended in a flourish of blooming branches, each adorned with dew-laden haitong blossoms that glowed with luminous radiance. This was Chuan-Ning's third holy weapon, Juga. On one hand, Mourung using ice. He's got them tied to ice pillars that, in my impression, he brought up. Although, hang on, let me try to confirm that real quick. No, it's not said that he particularly, conjures the pillars of ice. Okay. It doesn't say anything about that. Whether or not he did or not. The pillars of ice could have just been there. But if he did, that would have been interesting, but potentially impossible. Because he would remember being able to use water and therefore ice magics. Which you would then suspect some form of himself. But he would know that. He wouldn't be like, who uses water magic? Because obviously he does. He would in this version of things. I'm not even on this page anymore. Oh, that's the end of the chapter. Yeah, Kunlun is all ice. Thank you. We're on page 139 for chapter 100, and sorry, the title just actually hit me. This chapter title is Shizun's Last Words. Mourung's blood ran cold. He had only seen Chu Wanning's Guchen Juga once in his life, when he'd summoned it amidst their previous life or death battle. Then its cords had split the skies and sundered the clouds. Every entity under the control of Zhenlong chess formation, from the living people to the beasts and spirits, had recovered their consciousness at the sound of Juga's words. One song had thrown Mourung's million-strong army of chess pieces into utter disarray. Even so, summoning a holy weapon required the use of one's spiritual core and consumed a great deal of spiritual energy. That's what I'm wondering. Chu Wanning couldn't even call Tianwen anymore. How had he suddenly managed to call forth Juga, a weapon even more powerful? The confrontation above Heavenly Lake that day had been no less fierce than the death match betwixt master and disciple years before, yet Mourung's memory of it was a muddy blur, because that bloody battle had left him without a single person by his side he could talk to. Truth be told, even up until his death in the last lifetime, Mourung had never had figured out how Chu Wanning was able to summon Juga using only the strength of his soul. It was a kind of connection not known to exist between any holy weapon and its master, but Chu Wanning had managed it. That day, Mourung's Zhenlong chess pieces had crumbled to dust one after another at the thrum of the Guqin. Juga's strength was somehow even purer and more indomitable than the first time he'd witnessed it all those years ago, so much so that he suspected Chu Wanning's spiritual core hadn't been shattered at all, that he had merely been faking it all those years. That was my first thought. He had endured the indignities and bided his time, all for the chance to take his revenge in one fell swoop. That would be what makes immediate sense to me. Later still, Mourung couldn't help thinking it would have been better that way. If Chu Wanning really had simply been pretending, maybe things wouldn't have come to this point. If only. Well, now, what the I should probably just read. Juga nullified Mourung's forbidden magic and returned awareness to the thousands of Tashui Palace cultivators slaughtering each other. It even shattered the enchanted ice pillars that bound Shui Meng and Mei Han Shui. Thank you for saying they were enchanted. That's important information. Mourung leapt into the sky, robes flapping in the wind, his eyes flashing with anger and delight in equal measure. How many more surprising skills did Chu Wanning have up his sleeve? He couldn't wait to find out. He landed atop the barrier and strode across it to stand before Chu Wanning. That pair of slender, pale hands slowed, then laid themselves over the strings of the Guqin, muting its sound. Chu Wanning lifted his head, his face the color of snow beneath sun. He spoke. Mourung, come closer. Mourung walked over, although he couldn't say why he did so. Chu Wanning lifted his fingers, and streams of jade-colored light arced toward Mourung's chest. He was startled at first, thinking that Chu Wanning meant to kill him, but the light didn't hurt at all. It only hovered before his chest, then melted slowly into his skin and flesh, suffusing him with untold warmth. I've healed the wound Shui Meng gave you, Chu Wanning breathed a soft sigh. So let him off, Mourung. If even he's gone, when you want to reminisce about the past, who will you go to? Mourung was still processing the meaning behind these words when the sturdy barrier beneath his feet winked out of existence, along with Chu Wanning's Juga. He swiftly raised his hand to call Bugui so as to maintain his footing between the clouds, but Chu Wanning fell, gentle as a wilted leaf, as if his playing had exhausted the last of his strength. Wanning! Mourung's expression shifted instantly. He urged his blade down, catching Chu Wanning in his arms moments before he plunged into the icy waters of Heavenly Lake. Chu Wanning, you... Chu Wanning's eyes were closed. Blood trickled from his nose, his mouth, his eyes, his ears. this man had ever valued his dignity. Even in the years he was imprisoned within Wushan Palace, he had kept his back ramrod straight, and rarely presented himself as aught other than prim and pristine. But now he bled from all 7 orifices of his face, and his usually clear and refined countenance was a disheveled mess. Chu Wenning swallowed a mouthful of blood. "You said that life or death is not up to me. But you see, Moran," his voice was hoarse, "you've underestimated your Shizun after all. If I've made up my mind to leave, you can't stop me, no matter how you try." Shizun. Moran stared at him, feeling a chill wash over his heart, feeling his scalp go numb as he called out, helpless. Chu Wenning smiled, his expression almost relieved. I've held on to life these past few years because I didn't want to give up. Always thinking that I'd just keep you company a little longer, try to teach you not to commit any more sins. But now... Moran trembled as he held the man in his arms. He suddenly felt terrified. Such an emotion had been no part of him for more than 10 years, but now it rushed back in a wave, nearly carving out his heart. Now I see that, perhaps, it will take my death for you to stop doing evil. He fell silent, as if in immense pain. Summoning Juga had been more than his body could withstand. His insides were ripping apart. Another mouthful of blood spilled from his lips. Moran, cradling him in his arms, touched down on the shore of Heavenly Lake. He channeled spiritual energy into Chu Wenning's chest without pause, his expression crazed and anguished. But that powerful stream of spiritual energy only sank uselessly into Chu Wenning's body, like water through a sieve. Moran panicked. Taishanjun clutched the man in his arms tight to himself, trying and failing again and again to pass him spiritual energy. It's useless. Moran, I used the last of my life to summon Juga. This is the end for me. But if you yet have any clarity in your heart, then please forgive. Forgive whom? Shuemeng, Meihan Shui, Kunlun Tashui Palace, or the entire cultivation world? Yes, he'd forgive them all, so long as Chu Wenning lived, so long as this man he hated to his very core didn't die like this. Chu Wenning raised a trembling hand and a cold fingertip, as if out of pity, but also almost tender, poked lightly at Moran's forehead. Then please forgive. Forgive yourself. The ferocity on Moran's face froze in a rictus. Forgive whom? As he lay dying, just whom was he worrying over? Forgive yourself. Was that what he'd said? As he held Chu Wenning, Taishanjun was at something of a loss, but also somewhat delighted, racked by misery, but also perfectly content. Forgive myself, Moran muttered, his eyes bloodshot. Your last wish is for me to forgive myself. He burst into laughter, and the sound pierced the skies like a raging inferno, burning away all reason and rationality. Forgive myself? Chu Wenning, you're even crazier than me! How naive! The slopes of Kunlun Mountain echoed with his deranged, miserable laughter, twisted, unrecognizable, terrifying. Chu Wenning swallowed another mouthful of blood, surrounded by the sound of Moran's insanity. Had he still possessed the strength, his expression would have been one of anguish, but he no longer even had the wherewithal to furrow his brows. Only that pair of phoenix eyes, those eyes that had been at times sharp or resolute or harsh or gentle, were now filled with sorrow. Clear as the snow over Heavenly Lake, clouded as the frost, limning the roof tiles. Slowly, Chu Wenning's eyes grew unfocused, and his pupils dilated. Slowly, What had once been bright and sharp as lightning could no longer see distinctly. After a spell, he said in a quiet voice, "Don't laugh anymore. I can't bear to see you like this." Mourning had no reply. "Mourning, everything that happened in this life, it's all because I failed to teach you well, because I called you vile and beyond remedy. It was I who wronged you. I won't blame you, in life or in death." No color remained on Chuanning's bloodless face. Even his lips were a pale blue. He lifted his gaze, with great effort, to look at Mourning. He wanted to cry, but instead it was blood that flowed from his eyes and slid down his cheeks. Chuanning wept. "Do you truly hate me so much that you won't grant me a moment of peace, even at the very end?" Mourning, don't do this anymore. Wake up. Turn back. Turn back. Wake up. Chuanning told Mourning to wake up, but he himself, his hollow eyes wide open, sank into an endless slumber. Mourning didn't believe, he refused to believe, that Chuanning could just die like this. That the great Zongsha of an era, that high and lofty man, his Shizun, the person he despised more than anyone, could die just like this. Lying in his arms at the edge of Heavenly Lake dyed red with blood, growing cold bit by bit, cold as frost, frozen like ice. Chuanning's face was awash in blood. Mourning stared for a time with his head bowed, then raised his sleeve to wipe it clean. But there was too much blood. The more he wiped, the more he dirtied that once clear, clean face. Mourning pressed his lips together and wiped harder. All he got in return was a face smeared with gore, Chuanning's features nearly unrecognizable. At last he stopped laughing. Closing his eyes, he murmured quietly, "You won this time, Chuanning. I couldn't stop you from dying." He paused, then opened his eyes again. They were deep and dark, yet within that abyss a fire burned. "But you've underestimated me, too," he continued. "I can't stop you if you don't wish to live, but neither can you stop me if I don't wish you to die." Mourning brought Chuanning back to Shizun Peak. He said not a word about his death. By then, he was already immensely powerful, more than capable of staving off decay from a dead body indefinitely. Thus, he kept Chuanning's body at the Red Lotus Pavilion and forced him to live on in this manner. He simply couldn't accept that he had killed the last person in the world who still cared about him. So long as he could keep Chuanning's body from turning to ash, so long as he could still look at him every day, he could go on believing that Chuanning wasn't dead. There would still be a place for him to unload his deranged hatred, a place for him to entrust his twisted love. Taishanjun had finally gone completely insane. After Chuanning departed, Mourning would visit the Red Lotus Pavilion every day, without exception, to look upon his corpse. At first his eyes would flash with malice, and he would spit and curse before that body, saying, "Chuanning, this is what you deserve. You cared for every person under the sun but me, you hypocrite. What kind of master are you? I must have been fucking blind back then to take you as my master, you bastard." Later, he would ask relentlessly every day, "Why are you still asleep? When are you going to wake up? I've already let Shuimong go. Is that not enough for you? Get up already." Whenever he said such things, the servants accompanying him wondered if he had truly cracked and gone mad. The answer to that question is yes. His wife, Song Chutong, wondered the same. The prospect frightened her, and consequently, as she lay beside Mourning, after a rare night of intimacy, she seized the chance to say, "I'll run. The dead won't come back. I know you're sad, but who's sad?" Song Chutong paused. She was adept at reading faces, even more so after the year she'd spent at Mourung's side. Her every step was careful, like treading on thin ice. When she saw his ill temper, she fell silent at once and lowered her eyes, saying, "This one misspoke." But this time Mourung didn't let her off so easily. No, no, he pressed, narrowing his eyes. You've already spit it out, so let's have it. Go on, tell me. Who's sad? Your Majesty. Moran's dark eyes rolled with thunder. He abruptly sat up and seized Song Chutong by her delicate neck. With one hand, he lifted the woman he had just lain with and threw her off the bed. His face had twisted into something dangerous and bestial. What do you mean the dead won't come back? Who's dead? Who's not coming back? Moran pushed each word past gritted teeth, aggressive and emphatic. No one's dead. No one needs to come back, and no one is sad. Song Chutong's lips quivered. She wanted to protest, but no sooner had she uttered the words Red Lotus Pavilion, just that half of a sentence, than Moran saw red. What are you trying to say? There's no one at the Red Lotus Pavilion but Chuan-Ning, and he's asleep. What exactly are you trying to suggest, bitch? The sight of his terrible rage made Song Chutong's heart lurch. At this rate, she was unsure what he might do in his lunacy. Thus, she threw caution to the wind and gambled it all, raising her voice to say, Your Majesty, that man lying in the Red Lotus Pavilion is already dead, yet you wallow there every day. How can this one not worry? She chose her words carefully to evade blame, framing her own selfish desire as concern for Moran. Moran stared at her, and his breathing gradually evened, as if her words had gotten through to him on some level. He calmed his rage, then took a moment to steady himself. I've made you worry, he said. Song Chutong heaved a sigh of relief. This one wishes only for your Majesty's well-being, and would gladly die for it. Your Majesty is deeply compassionate, but you must not be so despondent. Then tell me, how do you think this venerable one should be? Forgive this one for saying so. This one only means well for your Majesty, but it's time to bury Chu Zongsha. He's already gone, and keeping his empty body around like this will only cause your Majesty more pain. And you have more to say, do you not? Might as well get it all off your chest while you're still alive. When she saw his expression relax, Song Chutong's heart, which had leapt up into her throat, settled back in its place in her chest. She lowered her lashes and tilted her head slightly. She knew she looked most like Shiming Jing this way. Song Chutong was perfectly aware that Shiming Jing was Mo Wei Yu's weakness. What she couldn't understand was why, no matter how she dressed like him or carefully imitated his demeanor, she still couldn't arouse Mo Run's interest. Although this temperamental man enjoyed her company, he only ever touched her when he was very low or very drunk. Song Chutong suspected that perhaps Mo Run wasn't really into women. Whatever the reason, it definitely wasn't because he wasn't into Shiming Jing. All of Xisheng Peak knew that the man who had died many years ago was Emperor Taishanjun's true love. Compared to that, what the hell was Chuan-Ning? Song Chutong believed he was nothing more than a plaything on which Taishanjun vented his lust, a plaything he'd already grown tired of fucking at that. Chuan-Ning may have traded his life for Mo Wei Yu's disquietude and remembrance, but she was certain it was at most a momentary guilt, a temporary disruption to routine. She was confident in her face. This face that looked so much like Shiming Jing's. That person in the Red Lotus Pavilion, neither living nor dead, could never outmatch her on this basis alone. But Mo Run couldn't be allowed to persist in this insanity. The world these days was in chaos, wars springing up left and right, and she was terrified that she might have hitched her horse to the wrong wagon. She wasn't young anymore. If Mo Run were to lose his standing, she was unlikely to find another sky-reaching tree she could climb to the top. So she sincerely, wholeheartedly, hoped that Mo Run would pull himself together and cease his madness. She mulled it over, weighing the risks against the rewards. In the end, she summoned up the courage to say, "And once Chu Zongsha is gone, there will be none worthy of the Red Lotus Pavilion." Right? Go on. This one thinks, with that being the case, the pavilion will only serve to remind your Majesty of the past, so... Mo Run narrowed his eyes. So perhaps it would be best to seal away the Red Lotus Pavilion after this. A pavilion with only one master makes for a good tale. Well, real quick, that was the end of the chapter. We're on page 149 for chapter 101, and we're a little overdue for the break we usually take about halfway through. So before this happens, let's go ahead and take a break, take a breather. This is a time, to put it mildly. So we're gonna stand up, walk around. I'm gonna reheat my tea, and I'll be right back for whatever is about to happen to that woman. Alrighty? Whew, we gotta breathe. We gotta shake it off. We'll be okay. We'll be alright. I'll be back in a few minutes to keep reading. Whew. We're back. If you're wondering how it's going, over the break, I had the realization that I had never put an actual tea bag in my mug. And so I spent that first hour drinking hot, sweet water and didn't notice because this is so fucking sad. That's how I'm doing. How are you guys? Anyway, we're on page. I no longer have a brain. Is going to be a really interesting last half hour here. We're on page 149 for chapter 101, which is called Shizun, the last flame in this world. Fitting, I feel. Moran said nothing for a long while. Then he smiled brightly. A pavilion with only one master would make a good tale, huh? Well said. His shapely feet trod unhurriedly across the ice-cold stone of the floor, the blue vein across the top flexing as he came to a stop before Song Shutong. Moran lifted one foot and tipped Song Chutong's chin up with his toes, compelling her to meet his gaze. You've been keeping all this bottled up for quite some time, He looked down upon her terror-stricken face with a smile. Empress Song, you know, there are a number of things I've never asked you about. Since you're pouring your heart out today, why don't we just have it all out, Come, let's have a nice chat. We can start with the most recent, Moran continued. The day I set out for Tashway Palace, I clearly remember locking Chu Wanning in the residential palace before leaving. So tell me, how was it that he appeared at Kunlun Mountain? Who let him out and allowed him to come find me? Song Chutong's entire body shuddered. I don't know, she exclaimed. In her panic to explain herself, she even forgot to refer to herself as this one, slipping into I instead. Moran smiled. All right, you don't know that one. Next, then. The year I made you... I'm flipping from the right. Okay. The year I made you Empress, I also entrusted you with the management of Xisheng Peak. Afterward, I had to travel to Yin Mountain to take care of some business. Chu Wanning had been disobedient at the time, so I had him locked in the water prison to reflect on his actions. Song Chutong's face grew pale at his mention of this matter, and her lips began to quiver. You used the excuse of a prison inspection and went to visit him, but he thoroughly scorned you. Yes, Song Chutong said in a rush. But your majesty, Aran, I told you about this incident back when it happened. Chuzong Shi dismissed me in such a disparaging manner and then proceeded to insult not only myself but your majesty as well. I couldn't contain my anger at the time. This venerable one knows. Moran's smile was faint. You couldn't contain your anger at the time. But Chu Wanning had committed grave crimes, and his punishment couldn't be increased without this venerable one's permission. So you carried out a piece of minor discipline and had all 10 of his nails pulled out and stinging thorns inserted into the tip of each finger. Song Chutong's eyes filled with horror as she scrambled to say, Your Majesty, when you returned, you praised me for doing well. Moran continued to smile. Oh, did I? You said that foul-mouthed people should be treated just so, and you even told this one that the punishment was rather light, that if he should speak rudely again in the future, to break his fingers. Her voice trailed off until, in the end, faced with the terrifying smile on Moran's face, she collapsed to the ground in tears. Moran sighed softly. He smiled. Chutong, that was so long ago. This venerable one no longer remembers what he said or didn't say back then. Song Chutong held her tongue. She had by now guessed Moran's intent, but her body still shuddered violently at his words. This venerable one's been having dreams lately. Dreams about that day, returning from Yin Mountain and arriving at the water prison to find him with both hands festering and covered in blood. Moran spoke slowly, but his voice tightened toward the end, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. This venerable one was not happy. Your Majesty, Song Chutong repeated helplessly. No, Aran, let me explain. Please, calm down and let me explain. This venerable one was not happy. Moran continued as if he hadn't heard a word, lowering his expressionless face to look coolly at the woman huddled on the floor. Indulge me a bit, won't you? Song Chutong had spent these years at Moran's side with her life on the line, like sleeping beside a ferocious tiger. Nevertheless, when she saw Moran's countenance like frost and snow, paired with such an imperious request, Song Chutong broke out in gooseflesh, and her scalp went numb. She could smell the scent of the oncoming storm. She lifted her deep brown eyes and peered meekly up at him as she crawled forward on all fours to nestle herself by his ankles. Of course, anything Aran says. What can I do to make Aran happy? I'll definitely... Moran leaned over and gripped her jaw, wrenching her face upward. He wore a lovely, innocent smile, just like the one he'd worn when he first laid eyes on her at Rufeng Sect. Then, twin pools of sweet dimples had adorned his cheeks as he tugged at her sleeve and said, Xiaoshime, what's your name? Hiya, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. Talk to me, okay? She shuddered. After so many years, yet with practically the same expression and the same tone, he said something else altogether. Chutong, this venerable one knows you mean it, that you'll do anything to make this venerable one happy. His words were sweet and gentle, and his fingertip caressed her soft lips, the part of her that looked most like Shimingjing. Mourung's lashes trembled lightly as he stared calmly at those petal-like lips. Finally, he said, "Then you may go wait for this venerable one on the road to hell." Song Chutong froze. "Okay?" he asked gently. The tears that spilled from Song Chutong's eyes were not from sadness, but from fear. She'd known the instant Mourung brought up her past abuse of Chu Wanning that this was going to end badly for her, but she thought the worst that could happen would be punishment by the rod or the loss of her title. She did not have the courage to even imagine that Mourung would that he would actually bear to... Madman. He's gone mad. He is gone mad. Mourung threw his head back and laughed in a low voice. His laughter grew increasingly arrogant, increasingly unrestrained. He laughed as he kicked open the door of the residential palace, laughed as he strode outside. He had always trod with abandon, had trampled countless lives. Now it was her turn. "He's gone mad. He's gone mad. Mo Wei-yu has really gone mad." Song Chutong sank to her knees on that ice-cold floor of stone and golden bricks. The ardor of intimacy within the residential palace had yet to dissipate, but the fires of hell had begun to burn. That's a sentence and a half. With her mouth hanging slack and her head tipped backward, she struggled to look at the sky outside the palace. Dawn was breaking, and the sky was the color of blood. Her bloodshot eyes were dyed crimson. In the distance, she heard Mourung call, so casual he might have been ordering his dinner for the day. "Guards, take the Empress away." "Your Majesty," came the panic reactions of the retinue outside. "Your Majesty, this..." "Toss her in the cauldron. Fry her alive." Song Chutong suddenly couldn't hear anything anymore, like she had sunk deep into the sea. She couldn't hear anything anymore. "Fry her alive. Fry her alive. It'll be a lively good time that way." He walked farther and farther away, yet the sound of his laughter and shouting lingered over Xishang Peak like a high-flying eagle, wheeling across the sky. The rising sun painted a long shadow behind him, a lonely figure on the ground. Ever so slowly, he walked. At first, the silhouettes of two youths seemed to walk beside him, and a tall man in white robes. Then the two silhouettes disappeared, leaving only the man in white robes to accompany him. He walked on, and the white-robed man, too, vanished into the golden dawn. The rising sun was pure and unblemished, and it claimed those who were likewise pure and unblemished, leaving only him, alone in hell, drowning in an ocean of blood, sinking into the masses of ghosts and fiends. Only him, all alone, growing lonelier and colder the farther he walked. He walked until he felt like he was dead, that he had already died, becoming more deeply deranged with every step. Mourung remembered, in the year before he took his own life, that when he looked into the copper mirror, he sometimes couldn't even recognize the monster staring back at him. He remembered the night before he died, when he sat in the bamboo pavilion at the Red Lotus Pavilion with only an old servant to keep him company. "Lu Gong," he asked lazily, "what kind of person did this venerable one used to be?" He carried on without waiting for an answer, staring at his own reflection in the pond. "This venerable one didn't used to wear his hair like this when he was young. Much less this tasseled crown, right?" Lu Gong sighed. "It is as your Majesty says. The crown and hairstyle were both the recommendation of Empress Song after your ascension to the throne." "Oh, you mean Song Chutong?" Mourung sneered and tipped his head back to take a gulp of pear blossom white wine. "I actually listened to her suggestions back then, huh?" Maybe it was because the end was nigh, and there was no more need to worry about accidentally pricking the Emperor's sore spot with a stray word and losing his head. Whatever the reason, the drooping old man spoke the candid truth. "Yes," Lu Gong said. His eyes were downcast and his hands tucked into his sleeves. "When your Majesty first ascended the throne, Empress Song was quite favored. There was a period of time when your Majesty did aught the Empress asked. Did your Majesty forget?" "Forget?" Mourung chuckled. "I didn't forget. How could I possibly forget?" After he'd married Song Chutong, someone had whispered to her that the reason he favored her was solely due to her likeness to the deceased Shimeng Jing. She was a clever person. She spared no effort inquiring after Shimei's mannerisms and bearing, then subtly exhibited the same in their everyday life as husband and wife, so that it seemed almost like the dead had come back to life. How could he possibly forget? Mourning smiled mirthlessly, then suddenly plucked the crown from atop his head and tossed it into the pond without bothering to look where it landed. As startled koi fish leapt from the water and the visage reflected therein became warped and distorted, he loosened his topknot and let his inky hair fall. He leaned by the pond side, letting the mercurial light of the rippling, sparkling waters dance across his face. There we go. The crown's gone and the hair's down. Old Liu, help me think. What more does this venerable one need to do to look as he did before the enthronement? A hair tie, right? Mourning examined his reflection. That blue hair tie commonly worn by disciples of Xisheng Peak. Are there any left in the palace? There are. When you shed your disciple uniform to ascend the throne, Your Majesty charged this old one with its safekeeping. I will go fetch it if that is your Majesty's wish. Excellent. Go on, then. Bring the whole set. The hair tie, too. Lu Gong left and returned bearing a stack of old clothes. Mourning sat up. As the tips of his fingers brushed the familiar texture of the cotton and hemp, snatches of the past fluttered up like dried leaves to land on his tattered heart. Now eager, he took up an outer robe and put it on. Art. But the clothing of his youth was far too small. It wouldn't fit no matter how he tugged or pulled. He flew into a rage. Why doesn't it fit? Why can't I go back? Well, I've got news. He paced like a trapped beast in a cage, insanity in every line of his face and his eyes flickering with a dangerous light. This is the Venerable One's clothing, isn't it? Did you fetch the wrong set? If it is this Venerable One's clothing, why would it not fit? Why would it not fit? The old servant was by now accustomed to seeing his master in the grip of madness. Lu Gong used to think Mourung's moods terrifying, but today, for some reason, he found the man before him pitiful instead. He wasn't looking for clothes. He was looking for himself. The Mourung of the past who could never return. Your Majesty, the old man sighed, soft. Let it go. You're not that young man of years gone anymore. At these words, Mourung ceased his raging and fell silent. His head whipped around fiercely to glare at the old man's withered face, but he was unable to get a single word out, as if he were choking, and in the end only breathed harshly as he stared with red-rimmed eyes. It was several minutes before he finally managed. I'm not. You're not. A long pause. I can't go back. You can't go back. For the first time, a childlike helplessness appeared on the face of that 32-year-old man. He closed his eyes, the jut of his throat bobbing. The old servant stood to the side with his head bowed, thinking, once he opens his eyes, he'll surely bare his fangs and shred everything in his path with a snarl. But when Mourung opened his eyes again, they were wet with tears. Perhaps it was this that extinguished the inferno in his heart. Art presented without comment. Wild how tea tastes great when you put a tea bag in. Mourung opened his mouth and, in a voice hoarse and weary, murmured, I see. I see. I can't go back. I can't go back. He set down the robe as if exhausted, took a seat by the stone table, and buried his face in his hands. A long moment passed before he said, Then I'll just tie up my hair. Your Majesty, why do all this? This venerable one's life will soon end. Don't want to be too lonely when the time comes. His face remained in his hands as he spoke, his expression indiscernible. I just want to change my clothes and feel like I still have old friends around for company. Lu Gong sighed. That's just make-believe. Make-believe is fine, Mo Run replied. Make-believe is better than nothing. He pulled his long hair back, wrapping the tie around it once, twice. Then he picked up a hair clasp with faded edges from the pile of old clothes, intending to pin it in his hair just as he had when he was young. But as he looked at his reflection in the water, his hand stilled. Which side did the pin go in from again? Was it the left or the right? He hadn't used this hair clasp for many years. He could no longer remember. Mo Run closed his eyes and asked, Old Lu, do you know how I used to wear my hair? To answer your majesty, this old one only came into the palace 2 years after your enthronement. This old one cannot answer you. But I can't remember, Mo Run insisted. I need someone to tell me. Lu Gong remained silent. Where can I find someone who knows? Mo Run murmured. Who can tell me what I used to look like? Old Lu heaved a lengthy sigh but couldn't think of a single name. Truthfully, Mo Run also knew in his heart that the old man had no answer to give him. And so, he held that black hair clasp uncertainly to his left, then his right, before settling on the left side and pinning it there. That seems right, Mo Run said. Let me go ask him. It is somewhat brutal to learn that he didn't just... It's not as easy as he just died a tyrant and then for whatever reason he was reborn in his younger self. But that he glimpsed reality and what he'd really done. And for that and other reasons, couldn't live with himself. Which is what I imagine a tyrant would do if this were to happen to them. I've actually said it exactly that for quite a while about one piece of shit in particular, but we won't go there. He strode toward the inner recesses of the pavilion and came to the side of the red lotus pond where Chu Wanning's body lay, looking for all the world as if he were merely asleep. Mo Run settled himself down on the ground, then propped his cheek in one hand and said, Shizun. The breeze carried with it the faint fragrance of the lotus blossoms. As he looked at that man lying with his eyes closed within the vibrant, intoxicating red of the pond, Mo Run now found he had quite a lot he wanted to say, but at the same time he didn't know what to say at all. When it came to Chu Wanning, Mo Run seemed always to be full of emotions. But those emotions were too jumbled, contained too many flavors. Amidst the sweet and the sour and the bitter and the spicy, he couldn't tell if the greater part of what he felt toward this man was hatred or something else. He really, honestly didn't know how to behave toward this person. It's not like he was dumb. He had once convinced himself that the sole reason he kept Chu Wanning around was to vent his hatred and sate his desires, but then Chu Wanning had died, and Mo Run still kept this corpse that he could no longer even lie with. The grave had been dug, but Mo Run couldn't bear to bury him. What use was there in keeping this cold, unmoving corpse that couldn't speak? Even he didn't really know. The two of them had been through too much, and whatever tiny, pure thing there had been at the start had been drowned to death long ago. Like, I don't know, when you pick the wrong flower for perfectly innocent reasons and then you get smacked down by the person you were going to give it to, maybe. You talking about that moment? Maybe? When Chu Wanning was still alive, the two rarely passed any peaceful, amicable days together. But now that Chu Wanning was gone, a kind of cruel gentleness grew between the living and the dead. Moran visited him often, a jar of pear blossom white wine in hand, and looked without saying much at all. Now he was besieged on all sides, and knew that his life was at an end. Dead as he was, Chu Wanning was the only person from his past, the last one left in this Xisheng peak that looked the same but held none of the same people, the only one who had stayed beside him all this time. Moran suddenly wanted to have a nice, long heart-to-heart with this cold corpse. Chu Wanning was dead. He could neither protest nor berate him. No matter what Moran said, his Shizun would have no choice but to lie there and listen. Yet when Moran tried to move his lips, his throat felt tight. In the end, he only managed to say one thing. Shizun, pay attention to me. That's the end of the chapter. You know, it's almost like all he really needs at the core of his very soul is a little validation. I wasn't expecting to relate to Moran, but here we are. Page 161 for chapter 102, which will be the last chapter of the day. It's called Shizun's Shizun. These chapter titles are threats. Have you noticed that? Shizun, pay attention to me. They were the words Moran had spoken when they'd first met beneath the heaven-piercing tower. At the time, Chu Wanning's eyes had been closed. When Moran called to him, his lashes fluttered open. These were also the words Moran said when they parted for the last time at the Red Lotus Pavilion. At that time, Chu Wanning's eyes had also been closed. Moran called to him, but he never again raised his head. That one sentence drifted for half a lifetime, from the heaven-piercing tower to the edge of the lotus pond, and finally settled into dust. All those years of hate and love scattered and went cold. Moran had finished his last jar of pear blossom wine and descended from the southern tip of Xisheng Peak toward the eve of his final day. The next morning, the rebel army that charged into Wushan Palace discovered that Taishan-jun, that calamity upon the world for the past 10 years, had taken his own life at the age of 32. 2 lifetimes had passed. That was a scene break. Moran opened his eyes. He had slept the night through under the flowering tree before the heaven-piercing tower, and he woke up dazed and lost, unable to tell when he was. Shizun, he murmured absently. Pay attention to me. Only then did he remember that, in this lifetime as well, Chu Wanning was gone. I'm terrified at the prospect of comparing and contrasting how he dealt with Chu Wanning's death before and how he's going to deal with it now. In his past life, Mourning had become accustomed to his everyday being a bitter struggle. Then Chuaning had been the one who had walked with him to the very end. He didn't want to be that vile person again in this life. But now, Chuaning wouldn't be around to see what became of him. Perhaps the heavens themselves couldn't bear it, or perhaps it was simply fate. Chuaning had grown disgusted beyond endurance with him in the past life, so in this one, he was the first to take his leave. Mourning laid his arm across his eyes, holding back the tightness in his throat. He heard Shui Jungyong shouting frantically in the distance. His uncle was looking for him, calling, "Runner, where are you? Runner!" Shumei was calling for him as well. "Aran, where are you? Hurry and come out." "Runner, come back and keep Yuhong company. Don't do anything stupid, Runner." Keep Yuhong company. Keep him company. Mourning dragged himself up off the ground and staggered toward the voices. He couldn't collapse. There was so much he still had to do. They still hadn't found the person behind all this, not to mention the heavenly rift could open again at any time. Xisheng Peak had suffered heavy losses in the catastrophe, and there were innumerable matters that needed to be seen to. Shuimeng was heartbroken from grief, so anguished he couldn't even rise. Mourning couldn't collapse too. You know, what finally does me in, after all of that, might be how Mourning is in right now having an impulse to live after Chuaning's death instead of his old impulse to die, because he still has people around him, because he hasn't burned everything down. He still has things to care about and people to care about. Now I'm fragile. So Mourning endured it and forced himself to pick up the pieces. He told himself, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. This wasn't the first time he'd lived through Chuaning's death. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. But how could it not hurt? Over 3,000 steps Chuaning had crawled, carrying him on his back. How could it not hurt? He drained his very last reserves of spiritual energy. He'd given it all to Mourning. How could it not hurt? He had suffered an identical injury, but so as not to burden his disciple, he had adopted a heartless expression and left on his own. How could it not hurt? And in the past life, Chuaning had also suffered the same injury as Shumei. It was just that he hadn't said anything about it. He hadn't said, and Mourning hadn't asked. He'd roared angrily at Chuaning, vented endless hatred on him, flung to the ground those wontons Chuaning, who had yet to recover from his own injuries, had worked so hard to make for him. Before his eyes, Chuaning had bent down, lowered his head, and then, one by one, had picked up each wonton and thrown them away. How could it not hurt? How could it not have hurt? He had dug out Chuaning's heart. How could it have not hurt? How could it? Mourning couldn't take a step further. He stood in place for a long spell, trying to suppress these feelings, trying to rescue his calm. His entire body trembled. It hurt. He buried his face in his hands, bit down on his lip, and swallowed his sobs with the blood. A very long time passed before he managed, just barely, to pull himself together. He lifted his head, his eyes red around the rims, and drew in a deep breath. Then, slowly, he walked down the steps. He couldn't collapse. Uncle. Runner, where were you? You had me worried half to death. How am I going to face you hung in the afterlife if something happens to you? It was my fault, Mourning said. I'm okay now. Sorry to have made Uncle worry. Shui Jingyong shook his head. He wasn't quite sure what to say, so he only patted Moran's shoulder. After a long moment, he said, It's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're already so much stronger than Meng, he sighed. Where's Shui Meng? Moran asked hoarsely. Sick. He has a high fever. He just drank his medicine and went to sleep. He's inconsolable when awake, crying all day. Sleep will do him some good. Shui Jingyan looked exhausted. The heavenly rift of the infinite hells has the whole cultivation world in a state. Even the upper cultivation world is sending people to look into the matter now. But whoever's behind it covered his tracks incredibly well. Butterfly Town was practically leveled in the bloody battle, and no clues were left to be found. Moran wasn't at all surprised to hear this. This individual's abilities were clearly beyond what anyone, including himself, had anticipated. Someone who could take Chu Wanning's life obviously wouldn't be so careless as to leave traces. What does the upper cultivation realm plan to do? Representatives from each sect are holding a meeting at Spiritual Mountain to discuss the matter, Shui Jingyong replied. I'd planned to set off for it tomorrow, but I'm worried about leaving when Meng is like this. He was right. Even the world's preeminent Zongshe, Chu Wanning, had lost his life in the incident at Butterfly Town. Negligent as the upper cultivation world might be, they could no longer afford to simply sit by and watch. Who laid down the spells that opened the barrier? What is he after? What's his next move? These questions circled in their hearts like vultures. Everyone wanted answers, but an extensive investigation had yielded none. They had no choice but to cooperate with one another. Don't worry, Uncle, Moran said. I'll help Aunt take care of things in the sect while you're gone. That's good, Shui Jingyong sighed. I wish I didn't have to burden you with this. With Shui Jingyong's departure and Shui Meng lost in his fugue, all the accumulated scrolls of paperwork and attendant tasks fell to Moran. He threw himself wholeheartedly into the work without daring to rest for a moment. If he stopped to rest, stopped to think, the anguish and regret would drag him into the abyss and torture his broken soul. He wished he could bury his head in scrolls day in and day out, if only so he could ignore the endless torment and guilt that racked his heart. When the infinite hells had opened, yin energy had flooded the mortal realm, and all manner of fiends, long suppressed, had seized the opportunity to escape and wreak havoc across the land. The letters of commission requesting aid from Xisheng Peak had practically piled up into a small mountain. Moran busied himself taking care of it all, forgetting to sleep and skipping meals. He often stepped into Loyalty Hall at the break of dawn and stayed late into the night before returning to his quarters to rest. Ooh, I just scraped the mic. That's my fault. But even buried in this ocean of paperwork, he would find himself pricked unawares by splinters of Chu Wanning left behind. Qingjiang region has been troubled as of late, and most of the 82 families in Fengling village are old and ailing with no means to defend themselves. We are fortunate to have a holy night guardian automaton made by your esteemed sex elder to fend off the fiends for now, but this is not a long-term solution, so we would like to request... A drop of wax slid slowly down the candle and the wick crackled. Moran came to with a start. He had been staring vacantly at the letter for some time, his finger tracing the words Holy Night Guardian over and over. In his mind's eye he saw Chu Wanning in the Red Lotus Pavilion, his hair pulled back in a ponytail and a sanding file held in his mouth as he poured his focus into oiling an automaton. Moran let out a long breath. He pressed his fingers to his forehead and rubbed lightly. Suddenly he heard someone knocking. Shimei? The beautiful young man dressed in light, simple white robes entered balancing a tray. He set it down beside Moran's scrolls, then rolled up his sleeves and stirred the candlelight back to brightness. Aran, he said gently, you've been working all day. Have something to eat. All right. Moran forced a smile and laid down his scroll, continuing to knead at the throbbing pain between his brows. I made a bowl of ginseng chicken soup and a few side dishes. Shimei set out the plates and felt the temperature through the side of the bowl. Oh, good. It's still warm. As they ate, Shimei noticed a loose wisp of hair hanging before that handsome, weary face, and reached out to tuck it back in. Aran? That day, was there something you wanted to tell me? Moran's thoughts were scattered, and it took him a moment to understand what Shimei was asking. He glanced at Shimei. Which day? Chimay pursed his lips and lowered his gaze. He was silent for a time, then answered, "The day of the heavenly rift." Moran waited for him to continue. "You said you were going to go help Shizun mend the heavenly rift, and that there was something that if you still felt like telling me when you came back, then..." Chimay bowed his head, and his voice trailed off. In the glow of the candle, his delicate snow-white ears seemed a little pink. This is, like, the first time, or one of the first times, other than at the moment that he just, recounted, that I've even remotely thought that Chimay may actually return some level of feeling. Moran stared for a long time, but couldn't manage a single word. He knew, without a doubt, that he loved Chimay dearly. But right now, in this moment, he really wasn't in the mood. Not in the least. Moran was shameless and unmannerly. He couldn't care less what others said, and things like morality and etiquette were thoroughly foreign to him. But that didn't mean he was heartless. A long second passed in silence. When Moran finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Sorry. I feel really down right now, and I don't think this is the right time. So about that thing, I'll tell you some other time, okay?" Chimay's head snapped up, his beautiful eyes startled. Moran squeezed out a chuckle and raised his hand. He hesitated a second, then patted Chimay's head. "I'm kind of dumb. And there have been so many things to take care of lately. I don't know when I'll have a quiet moment to gather my thoughts. I don't want to be careless about it." Even the warmth of the candle couldn't conceal the gradual blanching of Chimay's face. "Careless?" He paused, then smiled. "Aran, it was life or death back then. I would have thought anything you were going to say at a time like that was something you'd already given careful thought to." "I have." Moran furrowed his brow. "I've thought about it for a long time, and it's never changed, but... Chimay leaned forward. Moran hesitated. "Eventually," he said. "But not right now." His hands clenched into fists in his sleeves. "Not right now, Chimay. You don't know yet. But it's something very important. I don't want to rush it and tell you at such a miserable time. "Young master," a junior suddenly barged in unannounced. When he saw that the one managing sect matters in Loyalty Hall was Mo Run, he hurriedly dipped his head in a bow and corrected himself. Mo Gongja." At this interruption, the faint blush on Chimay's cheeks faded. He flicked his sleeves and sat back in his chair, taking on a mild, unassuming appearance. Mo Run looked up, oblivious to the shift in Chimay's demeanor. "What is it?" "Reporting in. There's an esteemed guest at the sect entrance." "An esteemed guest?" Moran echoed. "Anyone of note from the 10 great sects is at Spiritual Mountain right now. Where'd this esteemed guest come from?" The disciple seemed both fearful and excited. His face flushed, and he stammered incoherently for a few seconds before he finally managed to blurt, It's Master Huaj... Who is this? Would this be... Huaizue? Huaizue? Zue? Huaizue? Is my best attempt. It's Master Huaizue of Wubei Temple. Huaizue. It was a J sound for the Z. All right, that time. What? Even the ex-Emperor Taishanjun couldn't help but jump to his feet. Chimay was startled as well. Master Huaizue. Mo Run had good reason to be shocked. This name's gonna come back to haunt me. Huaizue. Master Huaizue was practically a legend in the cultivation world. This man had long ago achieved enlightenment. By all rights, he ought to have ascended, but when the great gates of the heavenly realm had opened for him, he had pressed his palms together and said that he could not break with the mortal realm, could not let go of his lifelong obsession, and could not wash himself of past sins. In the end, the heavenly light dimmed, the lotus blossom wilted, and Master Huaizhui had ambled away from immortality in his threadbare monk's robes, his staff tapping lightly against the ground. After declining his chance to ascend and become an immortal, he had gone into seclusion at Wubei Temple to reflect. A century passed in the blink of an eye. 100 years since, the cultivation world had heard his name, but never laid eyes on his person. The number of seniors still living who had met him before his seclusion could be counted on one hand. In his past life, Mourning had turned the land upside down and still hadn't been able to meet this Master Huaizhui. Huaizhui had been too ancient and had passed away on a rainy spring day the year before Mourning climbed to the top of the human world. No one knew how old he'd been when he passed. Yet how unexpected. In this reborn life, Master Huaizhui had come calling in the dead of night of his own accord. Innumerable thoughts flashed through Mourung's mind in the space of an instant. Though he didn't yet know his business here, Mourung immediately recalled certain rumors about Master Huaizhui. Huaizhui. How could he have forgotten about Master Huaizhui? When Shimei died in the last lifetime, Mourung had been ignorant. He had no idea there was such a sage in the cultivation world. It was only later, when he was emperor, that he learned from his subordinates of the existence of one in this world who could wield rebirth. Excuse me, I just solidly went offline. It was only later, when he was emperor, that he learned from his subordinates of the existence of one in this world who could wield rebirth, one of the 3 forbidden techniques. That person was Huaizhui. He had dispatched people to Wubei Temple at all speed to request the sage's presence, that he might recall Shimei's soul. But the people he sent returned with the news that the great master had already passed away, and with him Mourung's last chance to revive Shimei. But right now, this person of legend was still alive. He was still alive. How did he forget that? How could he forget? It's not like he was dumb. Mourung's heart lurched, and he trembled all over. A blaze lit his eyes as he said hastily, "Hurry, invite the great master in." Before the disciple could respond, Mourung changed his mind. "Actually, I'll go welcome him myself." But he'd taken only 2 steps when there was a sudden flash of yellow from without the hall. Neither the candle nor its flame shuddered. There was no hint of a breeze. No one, not even Mourung with his keen eyes, had seen him enter. Yet a monk arrayed in a bamboo hat and threadbare monk's robes now stood commandingly inside Loyalty Hall. He had moved like lightning and stopped right in front of Mourung, who started at the sudden proximity. "This one is already imposing so late at night, and shall not trouble Mo Shiju." Footnote. Sorry, I cannot think right now. Footnote. For Mo Shiju, benefactor, almsgiver, a respectful term used by Buddhist and Taoist monks and priests to address lay people. Okay. A deep mellow voice drifted out from beneath the bamboo hat, startling both Mourung and Shimei. How was this the voice of a 100-year-old man? Mourung had barely finished the thought when the monk removed his bamboo hat. In the candle-lit hall, he looked no more than 30 years of age, with a pleasant appearance and a mild demeanor. His eyes were bright and sharp, but rather than projecting menace, they were calm and lucid, like the reflection of light and water. "You are?" The monk pressed his palms together and bowed low. "Amitabha." That comes with a footnote, as I think Amitabha usually does. Amitabha Buddha, merciful Buddha, is a greeting and prayer used by monks. This humble monk is Huaizhui. No one had expected Master Huaizhui, who was 100 years old at least, to look younger than Shui Jingyang. For a beat, there was only stunned silence. But Mourung knew a thing or two when it came to cultivation. Huaizhui was someone who had rejected ascension and chosen instead to remain in the mortal realm. The only difference between this man and an immortal was that final step of shedding his mortal body and undergoing the heavenly trial. That has its own footnote. Upon cultivating to enlightenment, a cultivator must first shed their mortal vessel and undergo 1 or more heavenly trials, possibly among other requirements, before they can transcend to become an immortal. Mourung's heart began to race. His vision swam, and his fingers dug into the table's edge with such force he nearly cracked it. He stared intently at Master Huaizhui's face as words from his past life whirled through his mind like drifting flakes of snow. There's a rumor that someone has successfully used rebirth, one of the 3 forbidden techniques, but it's a rumor only. There's no knowing whether there's any truth to it. Where is this Master I cannot speak. Where is this Master Huaidui? I'll pay any price to bring Shimei back. To answer your majesty, Huaidui has already passed away many years ago. He wrote nothing in all his life, and regarding rebirth, he said only that to change fate is in defiance of heaven's will, its dangers immeasurable. Other than that, he left nothing else. The words streamed past his ears. Master Huaidui had an unfathomable grasp of mortality and reincarnation. Word has it that he had dealings with the ghost realm. If he yet lived, perhaps Mingjing Xiang might be returned from the grave, but unfortunately, Master Huaidui was like a ghost lingering in the world of the living. He undoubtedly had a hand in anything and everything to do with the yin and the yang. Mourning drew in a deep breath and was surprised to find that his voice trembled faintly. Past acquaintance. Past acquaintance. He murmured, his own eyes locked with Master Huaidui's clear tones. Mourung's back was covered in a sheen of sweat. He asked in a voice so soft it was nearly inaudible, "Who is this past acquaintance?" Wait, excuse me. No, sorry. All right, it's fine. I got nothing going on. I got nothing going on up here. Too much going on up here at this moment in time. No coherent sentences whatsoever. The monk rose slowly. In the low candlelight, no shadow pooled beneath his feet. The sleeves of his plain, thin yellow robe hung low. The robe was obviously worn, but was completely smooth and free of wrinkles as it drifted lightly in the breeze, like the flickering outline of a ghost. This great master was certainly inscrutable. Mourung could practically hear the pounding of his own heart in his ears. He unconsciously stood with Huaidui, and the two of them gazed at one another. Great master. If there had been a mirror before him right now, he would have seen the light of hope that had dawned unbidden on his face, and the pleading look that followed in its wake. Who is this past acquaintance? Was it him? Was it him? Huaidui lowered his lashes and sighed as he pressed his palms together again. My disciple, Chu Wanning, perished 7 days ago. Tonight is the night his soul is due to return. This humble monk cannot bear to send off one so young, and comes to Xisheng Peak to beg Mo Shiju's pity. Please return this old monk, his disciple. That's the end of the chapter. What do you mean? What do you mean? I just hit the mic again. What do you mean? I don't. Where's the bookmark? What do you mean? We're on page 175 for chapter 103, which is called Shizun. I'm coming to find you. You know what? That's it. I'm done. I'm so deeply done. There's not even a stream this Thursday because I have dental work done tomorrow and can't stream the day after. So I'll see you in a week, I guess. That's it for this stream. I have no brain cells left. I don't. I simply don't. So, I love you very, very much. This volume, this fucking volume. I'll be back next week on Tuesday. It's going to be a whole ass week. It's not going to be 2 days. It's going to be a week. I'll be back then. I love you very much. I already said that, but I still do. So I'm saying it again. I love you very much. And I will see you in a week at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time to read more of this particularly interesting stretch. Please take care of yourselves. For the love of God, please take care of yourselves. And I will see you in a week. A whole ass week. I hope you had a time. I had a time and a half. I'll see you in 1 week.